In the stifling corridor where every word was forbidden, she maintained silence as her shield. But her eyes recorded every gesture, every denied sound. Years later, her voice broke through the darkness and brought back what they tried to erase. Subscribe to the channel and dive into this secret kept for decades. It was 1937 when the canoe docked on the banks of the Rio Negro, bringing Clara Mendez huddled under a canvas soaked by the Amazonian rain. At 13, with irregularly cut brown hair and downcast eyes, she carried only a bundle with 2 dresses and a medallion from her deceased mother. Her father, Mr. Antonio Mendez, a rubber tapper ruined by the rubber crisis, had handed her over as symbolic payment to the Sisters of Holy Providence, who maintained the Our Lady of the Afflicted boarding school, an institution that received children of various origins for moral and civic formation in the village of Santa Isabel. The Mother Superior, a Portuguese woman with lips as thin as cutting paper, received the girl as if receiving another burden. "We don't accept laziness or ingratitude here. Your father did us a favor, girl. The jungle is no place for a young woman to grow up." Clara didn't respond. The woman's words echoed as if coming from very far away, diluted between the roar of the boat engines that were moving away, taking her father, her past, her possibility of return. The first cut came without warning. A cold metal scissors against the nape of her neck, locks of hair falling to the worn wooden floor. "Lice don't enter this house." Clara felt the razor scrape what remained, silent tears flowing while the sisters spoke about hygiene and decency. It was at that moment, with her scalp exposed to the air and her dignity collected like the strands on the floor, that Clara made the decision that would change her life. During the initial medical inspection, when the doctor snapped his fingers near her ear, she didn't react. He repeated the gesture, stronger, nothing. "This one doesn't hear," he concluded with clinical disinterest, making a quick note. "Another unfortunate one they send us." The fictitious deafness was born thus, not as a calculated plan, but as a pure survival instinct. The nuns exchanged embarrassed glances, but eventually decided that she could remain as a work of Christian charity. Quickly, Clara learned that her new condition brought a convenient invisibility. The sisters spoke in front of her as if she weren't present. The punishments were less severe. How could one punish someone who cannot hear the rules? Within weeks, she mastered the art of the vacant stare, the slightly confused expression, and the awkward gesture that convinced even the most suspicious. But her eyes and ears captured everything. The rigidity of the boarding school was especially cruel to the indigenous children brought from the riverside communities. Their long hair cut, their names replaced with saints' names, their languages forbidden. "Savages need to be domesticated," Sister Conceição would say during meals, while observing the children in line with severity. Clara noticed the pattern. Indigenous girls wore more faded uniforms, received smaller portions, got the heaviest tasks. They slept on mats in the corridor, while the daughters of local merchants had beds. The boarding school was divided by a bamboo fence, boys on one side, girls on the other, with different schedules for everything. It was through this division that Clara first saw Rayoni. He was alone in the yard while the other boys played ball. He must have been about 15, a thin but strong body, eyes fixed on something distant. One of the guards pushed him roughly and shouted something that Clara couldn't make out. Rowney didn't react physically, but those eyes contained something that made her hold her breath. It wasn't fear or anger. It was dignity, a silent resistance that she recognized immediately. Sister Teresa, younger and less severe than the others, approached Clara. "This is Rowney, from the Baré people, stubborn like all of them. He doesn't want to learn Portuguese properly, doesn't accept the Christian name." The other boys avoid him. "The teachers have already given up. They say he speaks Ningatu when he's alone," she sighed. "May God have mercy on these lost souls." Clara pretended not to understand, but stored every word. In the following days, she began to observe Rowney during the rare moments when the groups crossed paths. He was always alone, sitting under a large kapok tree in the corner of the yard. Sometimes he drew symbols in the earth with a piece of branch. Other times he moved his lips in inaudible whispers, as if conversing with the birds. Clara began to pay attention to the other indigenous children too, noticing how they avoided speaking their languages near the nuns, but whispered among themselves when they thought no one noticed. The punishment for those caught was severe, kneeling for hours on corn kernels, going without food or worse. One day, during the embroidery class, Clara deliberately dropped her needle near the window that overlooked the boys' yard. As she bent down to pick it up, she saw Raoni teaching something to a younger boy. Hand movements, expressions, whispered words. The younger boy repeated hesitantly. Sister Adelaide suddenly appeared, grabbing Raoni by the arm. "Again with that devil's language. We'll see if 3 days in the dark room won't clean your head." Clara felt a tightness in her chest. That night she couldn't sleep. She got up silently and went to the kitchen, where she knew there was an old notebook used for expense notes. She tore out some blank pages and hid them under her mattress. The next day she began her record. For every gesture of Raoni's she could see, for every whispered word that reached her ears, she made a drawing, a notation. She didn't know exactly what they meant, but something told her it was important to preserve it. A language that died a little with each child forbidden to speak it. Weeks turned into months. Clara developed her own observation system. During Sunday masses, when everyone was gathered, she managed to get closer to the group of boys. She pretended to look at the altar, but her eyes captured Raoni's movements, the way he occasionally whispered to another boy, how his fingers moved discreetly. At night, under the weak light coming through the window, Clara drew in her hidden notebook. A word, a gesture, a sound. Raoni didn't know of her existence, but he was teaching her something that perhaps even he didn't understand the importance of. The rainy season arrived with fury that year, transforming the schoolyard into a muddy bog that confined the children to the humid and stuffy corridors. It was during this period that Clara found an unexpected ally. Professor Joachim, a 70-year-old man who taught mathematics and suffered from advanced cataracts, discovered her secret during a class when Clara instinctively reacted to thunder, turning to the window before she could control the reflex. He didn't report her. On the contrary, he began to leave small pieces of charcoal on her desk when no one was looking. Better material than the worn pencil stubs she managed to pick from the trash. Clara intensified her observation. Raoni now avoided speaking completely, using more gestures after his last punishment. A circular movement with the index finger meant sun or day. Hands undulating like a snake represented the river. Fingers pointing to the sky were birds, spirits, or ancestors. Clara wasn't sure yet. Each day her silent vocabulary grew. It was during a particularly strong storm that she witnessed something extraordinary. The children were gathered in the refectory due to leaks in the classrooms. While the nuns tried to organize some activity, lightning struck nearby, followed by deafening thunder. One of the younger indigenous girls began to cry, trembling with fear. Raoni, sitting at the other end of the room, discreetly raised his hands and began to make subtle movements. Clara recognized they were gestures of a story. The little girl watched him through tears, hypnotized. She didn't understand the words, but the gestures told of a boy who had captured thunder inside a straw basket and made it promise never to scare children again. Gradually, the girl stopped crying. A shy smile appeared on her tear-stained face. Clara felt something warm expand in her chest, not just admiration, but a deep connection with that boy, who resisted not through violence, but by preserving what they tried to erase. That night, she meticulously recorded each gesture of the thunder story. During the following months, Clara developed a symbol system to represent the sounds of Ningatu she could capture. She took advantage of every opportunity, masses, meals, garden work, to observe Raoni and the few others who still dared to use the forbidden language. Professor Joachim became her silent protector, sometimes creating distractions so she could observe longer. "I know you can hear," he whispered once, pretending to adjust her exercise book. "What are you guarding so carefully?" Clara hesitated, but something in the kindness of those clouded eyes made her trust. The next day, she showed him some pages of her secret record. The old professor examined the symbols with trembling fingers, bringing the paper close to his face to see better. "You are preserving something precious, girl. Something they want to kill." One Sunday afternoon after Mass, there was a commotion in the yard. A white man in a light suit arrived accompanied by government officials. The nuns gathered all the students, organizing them by age and origin. Clara noticed the fear in the faces of the older indigenous youths. Raoni was rigid, eyes fixed on the ground. By determination of the Indigenous Protection Service, young people who have reached 17 years of age will be transferred to the training center in Manaus. announced the man, consulting a clipboard. "There they will receive adequate training for functions in civilized society." 5 names were called. Rowney was among them. There was no time for goodbyes. Those selected were immediately taken to a vessel waiting on the river. From the window of the sewing room, Clara saw Rowney board the boat, head down but posture erect. At the last moment he looked up, as if he knew he was being watched. His eyes scanned the windows of the building until they found hers. It was only a second, but Clara felt as if he could really see her, not the girl pretending to be deaf, but her true self. He raised his right hand and made a gesture, circle in the air, followed by a touch to the chest. A gesture she had never seen before. The boat departed, taking Rowney to an uncertain future. The empty space he left seemed to scream in the silence of the boarding school. Clara continued her charade for 2 more years, accumulating more and more pages of notes, recording what she could capture from the few remaining speakers. When she turned 16, Professor Joachim, now almost completely blind, arranged her emancipation. "I have a sister in Belém who needs help at the municipal library," he explained. "You have a sharp mind. You can start a life there." The nuns, relieved to be rid of the deaf girl they considered a burden, didn't question it. Clara left on a morning of fine drizzle, carrying her few clothes and, hidden among them, the precious notebooks. As she walked out the gates, she looked at the kapok tree where Rowney used to sit. For a moment she thought she saw his silhouette there, but it was just shadow and memory. At the Belém library, Clara finally found a place where her silence wasn't strange. She worked organizing books, catalogues, old documents. At night, in her small room at the back of Ms. Matilda's house, the professor's sister, she continued to transcribe and organize her notes. With access to dictionaries and books on linguistics, she began to better understand the structure of what she had recorded. She realized that some words had Tupi roots, others came from Old Portuguese. Ngatu wasn't just an indigenous language, but an idiom that carried the history of the encounter between worlds. Years passed. Clara became a quiet, reserved young woman, known for her meticulous work with historical documents. She studied library science by correspondence. She never spoke about her past, or about the notebooks she continued to fill, now with comparative analyses and tentative translations. In 1955, she was invited to work at the newly created Regional Archive of the Federal University of Pará. There she had access to anthropological studies, travelers' accounts, linguistic analyses. She secretly compared her notes with these documents, confirming intuitions, correcting interpretations. Her collection grew, hidden in metal boxes under her bed. Sometimes, when she was alone in the archive, she caught herself whispering words in Ngatu, testing sounds she had only imagined. A language she knew intimately, but had never really heard spoken freely. She never knew what happened to Rowney. News from the boarding school ceased when Professor Joachim passed away, 3 years after her departure. For decades she carried the image of that last gesture, circle in the air, touch to the chest, without fully understanding its meaning, but feeling that it contained a promise, a secret, a connection that time and distance couldn't erase. Television arrived late to Clara's small apartment in Belém. At 74, she yielded to the insistence of her only friend, Donna Teresa, a retired university employee. "You can't stay disconnected from the world, Clara. Times are different." The device occupied a corner of the modest living room, among bookshelves crammed with books and meticulously organized folders. Clara rarely turned it on. She preferred silence, interrupted only by the singing of birds that visited her window and the distant noise of boats on the river. She never married. She never had children. Retired for almost a decade, she still consulted for the university archive, especially on ancient documents from the Amazon region. The notebooks of her youth, now bound and catalogued in her own system, occupied a locked shelf with a key she always carried with her. On that rainy night in 1998, tired after a day reorganizing her collection, she turned on the television almost by accident. A documentary about Brazilian indigenous languages was playing. Clara increased the volume, something rare in her habits. A gray-haired linguist spoke with a grave expression. Ngatu, also known as the Amazonian general language, is practically extinct. Our survey identified less than 12 living speakers, all elderly, and no active process of transmission to new generations. In 10 years, there will probably be no more native speakers. The cup Clara was holding slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. Something inside her, kept for decades, seemed to break too. For 60 years she had kept her records secret, fearing judgments, disbelief, or worse, disinterest. Now time was running out, not just for the last speakers, but for herself. She felt the weight of her own mortality and, with it, the urgency of a decision. 3 days later, she sent a brief letter to the Department of Anthropology at the Federal University of Amazonas. I possess systematic records of Nhingatu since 1937, visual and phonetic observations. I never spoke the language, but I documented its structure, vocabulary, and expressions for decades. They are available to share. She signed only Clara Mendez, Belém, PA, and her telephone number. The response came faster than she expected. A call in the same week. A young and excited voice on the other end. Professor Clara, this is Daniel Tavares from the Indigenous Languages Documentation Project. Your letter reached the department and, well, we're intrigued. Would it be possible for us to meet? A week later, Clara received in her living room 3 researchers. Daniel, a linguist in his 30s, Luisa, an anthropologist specializing in the peoples of the Upper Rio Negro, and Yara, a young indigenous woman from the Baré people, a master's student. On the table, Clara arranged only 3 of her oldest notebooks, carefully watching their reactions. The initial looks were of polite skepticism. Ms. Mendez, Daniel began, adjusting his glasses, we would like to better understand how you obtained these records. Did you live among the Baré? Clara took a deep breath. It was the first time she would tell her complete story. She spoke for almost 2 hours without interruptions. The boarding school, the fake deafness, Rowney, the years of silent observation, the hidden notebooks, the decades of solitary study. When she finished, a heavy silence hung in the room. Ayara was the first to speak, voice choked. May I see your notes? Clara nodded. The young woman opened one of the notebooks, eyes scanning the yellowed pages. Suddenly her face lit up. This is indeed Nhingatu. Look here, Professor. She recorded phonetic variations that don't even appear in the Socio-Environmental Institute studies. Daniel approached, incredulous. He leafed through the pages with reverent care. Unbelievable. There are terms here I've never seen documented. And these symbols for the sounds. Did you develop them yourself? Clara confirmed with a simple gesture. I had no one to teach me the correct form. I created my own system. Louisa, the anthropologist, examined another notebook. There are descriptions of rituals here, practices that were forbidden for decades. How did you manage to document this? Types by observing. Always observing, replied Clara. The children maintained their traditions in secret when they thought no one was paying attention. The 3 visitors exchanged meaningful glances. Ms. Mendez, Daniel finally said, what you have here is a linguistic and cultural treasure of incalculable value. We need to digitize, analyze, compare with existing records. With your permission, we would like to include this material in the Nhingatu Revitalization Project. Clara felt a lump in her throat. I have more, she said simply. She stood up with some difficulty and unlocked the special shelf. Dozens of notebooks organized chronologically, folders with clippings, comparisons, analyses. The work of a lifetime. All this, whispered Iara, eyes wide. All this is Nhingatu? And stories, and songs, and legends, replied Clara. Everything I managed to capture and preserve. In the following weeks, a team from the university worked in her apartment, digitizing each page, each annotation. Clara participated actively, explaining her recording system, contextualizing observations. But there was a question that tormented her, which she finally had the courage to ask Iara. The gesture, circle in the air, touched to the chest. What does it mean? The young woman smiled. It's one of the most beautiful in our traditional sign language. It means I keep you in here. It's a promise of memory, of eternal connection. Clara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 60 years of waiting dissolve into understanding. A promise from Rowney that she had fulfilled without knowing. A connection that had remained intact through time. The project gained unexpected strength. Reports in local newspapers. Interest from international linguists. A documentary filmmaker from Rio de Janeiro came to interview her. Clara, always reserved, now felt the urgency of time. The digitization project was less than 3 weeks from completion when she received the invitation that would change the ending of her story, a ceremony in the Kumurumawita village, on the upper Rio Negro, where her records would be officially incorporated into the Ningatu revitalization project. "There are people there who want to meet you," said Daniel. "Elders who were moved by your story." The idea of such a long journey at 84 seemed frightening, but Clara knew it was her last chance. Her heart, already fragile according to doctors, might not give her another opportunity. "I will go," she answered simply. The deadline imposed itself like a silent countdown, each beat of her aging heart marking the time that was running out to complete a journey begun in childhood. The journey to Kumurumawita was exhausting. First the flight to Manaus, then hours by boat up the Rio Negro, finally a pickup truck on red dirt roads that wound between dense vegetation. Clara observed everything with eager eyes, recording every detail as she had done her entire life. She was accompanied by Daniel and Iara, who took turns in concerned attentions. "We're almost there, Donna Clara," the young woman repeated, holding her wrinkled hand when the vehicle bounced over holes in the road. Clara just nodded. Her mind wandered between present and past, superimposing images of the forest of her childhood with the current landscape. Some things never changed, she thought. The smell of wet earth, the infinite green, the whisper of leaves like a continuous and ancestral conversation. The village appeared after a curve, houses of wood and masonry, some with satellite dishes, others with traditional straw roofs. Children ran to see the arriving car, pointing and smiling. In the center of the community, a larger circular construction, the meeting house. It was there that Clara saw the colorful banners and the table with computers. "Surprise," smiled Daniel. "The ceremony will be transmitted to other villages. It's an important event for all the peoples who speak or spoke Nhingatu." Clara got out of the car with difficulty, gently refusing the wheelchair they had prepared. "I'll enter with my own legs," she murmured. A group of women approached, adorned with seed necklaces and body paintings in red and black. The oldest among them, white hair tied in a bun, extended her hands to Clara. "Welcome, guardian of words," she said in clear Portuguese. "I am Jurema village councillor." Clara squeezed the offered hands, feeling skin calloused by decades of work. "Thank you for receiving me. I'm not indigenous. I have no right—" Jurema interrupted her with a gentle gesture. "Whoever preserves our language preserves our soul. You have all the rights." The ceremony began at dusk, the circular house filled with people, local residents, researchers, journalists, representatives of other ethnic groups. Clara was led to a special seat, decorated with flowers and woven leaves. In front of her, a table where her original notebooks were displayed alongside tablets showing the digitized versions. Daniel made the opening, explaining the project and its importance. Then Yara spoke in Ningatu, translating afterward. "When a language dies, we don't just lose words. We lose ways of seeing the world, of understanding nature, of connecting generations. Today, thanks to Clara Mendes, we recover not just vocabulary, but memory." Then came the moment Clara feared and longed for. They asked her to tell her story. With a trembling voice at first, then firmer, she narrated her childhood in the boarding school, the decision to pretend to be deaf, the years observing Raoni and the others. She spoke about fear, loneliness, but also about the inexplicable certainty that she was preserving something valuable. When she finished, there was a profound silence, broken only by the crackling of torches that illuminated the environment. Jurema stood up, wiping tears. "Many of us went through places like that boarding school. Many did not survive. Others survived, but lost their language, their identity. What you did, Clara, was an act of resistance as powerful as any rebellion." A young man approached, bringing a notebook. "We want to show you something, Donna Clara." On the screen appeared the face of a girl about 12 years old. She smiled shyly and began to speak in fluent Ningatu. Daniel translated, "She's thanking you for the notebooks. She says now she can learn the language of her grandparents at the village school. That your words have come home." Clara covered her mouth with her hands, unable to contain her emotion. The technology she had always avoided now brought the concrete fruit of her silent work. A child speaking freely the language she had documented in secret. Other children appeared on the screen, each reciting phrases in Ningatu, a living legacy breathing, growing. When the presentations ended, Jurema announced, "We have one more person who wants to speak with our guardian." A murmur went through the assembly. An elder with slow steps entered through the side door, supported by a cane carved with symbols that Clara immediately recognized, the same ones she had seen Rowney drawing in the earth of the boarding school so many decades ago. Her heart painfully accelerated. The man approached, eyes fixed on her. Hair as white as a cloud, face marked by deep wrinkles, but the look, that look of intact dignity that had traversed decades. "Rowney?" whispered Clara, her voice barely audible. He smiled, revealing the absence of some teeth. In Portuguese, heavy with accent, he said, "I thought I would never find you again, silent girl." Tears flowed freely down Clara's face. "You knew?" "You knew I could hear," Rowney nodded slowly. "I realized on the second day. Your eyes responded when I spoke, even when your body pretended not to hear. I saw you observing. I saw you keeping our words." With trembling hands, he made the gesture that had been engraved in Clara's memory for 60 years, circle in the air, touch to the chest. "I kept you in here," he translated, "and you kept our language." Clara repeated the gesture, feeling the complete circle her life had traced. "How did you survive?" she asked, referring to the years after their separation. "How all of us survived," he replied, "hiding some things, revealing others. I worked as a guide for anthropologists, as a translator for missionaries, always keeping alive what mattered." He raised his hand to the public. "I have 4 children, 16 grandchildren, 7 great-grandchildren. All speak Nhingatu, even those who live in the city." Clara felt a deep joy expand in her chest. "You achieved what I only dreamed of, directly transmitting the knowledge." Rowney shook his head. "Each one does what they can with the tools they have. You preserved not just words, but sounds, gestures, contexts that were being lost. Now our children have access to that." Jurema approached, bringing a necklace of red seeds and a small blue feather. "For our guardian of memory," she said, placing it around Clara's neck, "so that everyone knows you are part of our history now." The ceremony continued with songs, dances, stories. Clara remained seated next to Rowney, occasionally exchanging quiet words, filling the decades of absence with shared fragments of life. When dawn came, he asked something that surprised her. "Do you still have your original notebooks? The first ones from the boarding school?" Clara nodded. Daniel brought the box where the oldest ones were kept, now fragile pages yellowed by time. Rowney opened one of them with reverent care. "You drew this here." He pointed to a circular symbol with lines radiating outward. "Do you know what it means?" "I thought it was the sun," replied Clara. Rowney smiled. "It's more than that. It's our symbol for story that continues, a narrative that doesn't end with who tells it but goes forward." He looked at the children sleeping, leaning against their parents. "Like what we did here today." The next morning, before leaving, Clara asked to visit the river. With Yara's help, she walked to the shore. The water ran serenely, reflecting the blue sky and white clouds. "You know," she said to the young woman, "I spent my entire life looking backward, preserving the past. Now I see that I was, without knowing, building a future." Yara squeezed her hand. "You've given us a bridge between times. That is rare and precious." When the car departed, taking her back to the city, Clara looked through the rear window. Rowney was at the entrance to the village, hand raised in the gesture that had connected them across time. Circle in the air, touch to the chest. Clara repeated the movement, feeling a deep peace. Her fragile heart could fail at any moment, the doctors had warned. But now she knew that something of her would remain, not just in the digitized pages or academic archives, but on the lips of children who would freely speak the language she had helped preserve. 3 months later, Clara passed away in her sleep in her apartment in Belém. They found her with a serene smile on her face and, on her desk, a final notebook open where she had written in Nhingatu, with trembling calligraphy, the story that never ends. The Nhingatu revitalization project continued to grow. Bilingual schools were established in various communities. An application based on Clara's records allowed anyone to learn the basics of the language. In 2010, a school in Manaus was inaugurated with the name Professor Clara Mendes, dedicated to teaching indigenous languages and cultures. At the entrance, a plaque displayed the circular symbol that Rowney had explained. the story that continues, and below it in Portuguese and Hingatu, the phrase, "Whoever preserves a language preserves an entire world." If you were moved by this journey of resistance and memory, leave your comment about which moment touched your heart the most. Your like and subscription to the channel help us continue sharing stories that, like the language preserved,